Have you seen Chuck Norris lately? He's still kicking butt and staying active well into his 80s. What's even more shocking is he looks more jacked than ever and seems to have more energy than guys half his age. And it's all thanks to Morning Kick, a revolutionary new daily drink from Roundhouse Provisions that combines ultra-potent greens like spirulina and kale with probiotics, prebiotics, collagen, and even ashwagandha. Just mix with water, stir, and enjoy. Unlike other green drinks out there, this one tastes exactly like strawberry lemonade and has hundreds of 5-star reviews. Go to roundhouseprovisions.com/save44 for up to 44% off your regular priced order. Plus, every purchase is backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee. So if you want to experience smoother digestion, a boost of energy, and just an overall healthier body, then go to roundhouseprovisions.com/save44 today. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Results can vary.
Save big at Menards. Discovering the perfect paint for your home has never been easier with Zinsser Smart Coat. Plan smart with interactive tools at smartcoat.com. Buy smart in-store or online for home delivery. And paint smart with this advanced paint and primer in one. Save big on Zinsser Smart Coat at Menards, America's #1 home improvement retailer for customer satisfaction, according to J.D. Power. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Save big money at Menards.
The 3 Down Greencast is brought to you by the Pile of Bones Brewing Company. Home delivery available in Regina at saskbeerdelivery.ca. Well, welcome to the 3 Down Greencast. Joel Gasson with John Fraser as usual. And we open this episode on a little bit of a somber note, our first of 2021, for a bit of a hiatus, as unfortunately some sad news happened while we were not recording podcasts due to lack of interest. And that was, of course, the passing of a good friend to both of us and a lot of people in this province. One, Warren Woods. You may know him from the CJME Green Zone or his time on Global TV/STV as well. I'm sure you all know the story by now. You may or may not. Obviously, he got COVID late November. And through complications of that, eventually passed away in January. And it's been hard to wrap my head around a little bit at times with this. Obviously, I haven't really seen Woodsy since the end of the 2019 CFL season. I sit beside him in the press box at Rider home games, so it's going to be really weird whenever we're allowed to go back and do that again. That he won't be the guy beside me with his binoculars, looking at the crowd as much as he is the field. But so that's just going to be weird, and obviously. John, I would love to send we would like to send our condolences and thoughts to all of his family, his friends, colleagues, just everyone who knew Woodsy, because it's just been such an outpouring of support since that news kind of broke, and it's kind of been hard to deal with for a while.
Well, yeah, and absolutely. First off, I know you said let's not make this too political or anything, but I just want to say again, wear your fucking mask, because this is proof. One of my favorite memories of Woodsy was I remember when I got back into the announcing game, when I got back into being a sports reporter. You know, it can be pretty intimidating. You walk into a practice, especially at Riders training camp, and there's, and Murray McCormick, and at the time Rod Peterson and Lee Jones is there, and Woodsy's there, and all these guys that you're like, holy shit, I have been listening to and reading and looking up to all these guys, just consuming as a fan for so long. And I'll never forget, we were sitting in the bleachers at the U of S.
Yep.
And Woodsy, as he always does, he was holding court with all the old, all the old timers.
The Railbirds, exactly. Yeah. The Railbirds loved Woodsy, yep.
Exactly. And he was there, and it was funny because all through Rider training camp, until Woodsy was there, you had your media guys, then you had your fans. Mm-hmm. And he had this ability, he brought everybody together. Me being a fairly new guy, I was there was Murray and Vanstone and Rod, and there was a couple of those guys that show up at every Rider training camp, and he had this ability to sit there, and it was like he brought everybody together. We're all talking football. We're all talking about, everything we saw on the field. And I must say that the only man that's ever made me pay attention to practice.
Wow.
I'm famous for socializing and hanging out with the guys and working on my stories afterwards was Warren Woods. Because Woodsy would be making these observations and asking everybody's opinion and engaging everybody, and he engaged everybody. And it's just, there's so many egos in sports, even in this province.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this holier than thou. Thou shall, worship the ground I work on. I walk on. And Woodsy was never that, despite being an absolute legend. And, you and I have been there. There are days that you'll be someplace and you don't want to talk to everyday people.
Yeah. It's
a lot of energy because they're going to pick your brain and they're going to ask you these questions and they're going to hold your word as some value. And it can be a lot. And never once did I hear nor see Warren Woods not just jump and revel at that opportunity. And that's just a great man. And it's a shame that he's gone so early.
Mm-hmm.
And wear your masks, please.
Yes, I think sort of Sam McKegg of CBC, I think she tweeted it far more eloquently than you did. No offense, John.
See, that is the one thing with being like kind of out of the media for the most part.
Yeah.
We're really, in terms of my media presence, I kind of only answer to you because you even put up the shield between Dunk and I, or I'm like, I was angry, I was hurt, I knew how hurt you were,
mm-hmm.
I knew how hurt so many of my friends were, that I just had to work like a record 5 F-bombs into one tweet. And Ends Toyota, we do have a social media policy. And I remember texting our marketing guy, I'm like, hey, I'm quite upset about an old colleague and friend passing. I've put a whole bunch of F-bombs out there. I'm good, right? He goes, hell yeah, you are. So kudos to Justin. Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, so anyway, the gist of the whole thing was that COVID is real. Please wear a mask. Please wash your hands. Please keep your distance. And please continue to follow the guidelines. And that's, we could really go off the rails in a whole bunch of different directions about this politically.
We do that enough while we text every day.
Yeah, we could do that, but this is not what this platform, generally speaking, is about. That's not to say that we're not stick to sports guys. We're not going to do that sometimes when the time is right, but I don't think that's the time is right when we're talking about a good friend right now.
Absolutely.
For me, I got to work with Woodsy for a little bit directly when I was still at the Green Zone, and that's, there's a lot of things that'll always stick out in there, and it was always fun, because, he would come in for the 4 o'clock hour and do the first hour with Jamie, so I got to see him a little bit there every day. But one of the funniest things, was Woodsy's adventures with Twitter were always a lot of fun. Just because he would often tweet a fair bit. He would often tweet late compared to everyone else when he was doing, he'd sit there on his phone and it'd be a very slow, sort of get to the point sort of tweet. And I remember one day, we were at a press conference. I believe it was after Corey Chamberlain was fired. Corey Chamberlain and Brendan Tamlin were both fired. And all of a sudden, Woodsy's trying to tweet something on his phone, and a big video goes off. A big video, the big sound, and it was hilarious. I think it was Lay's chips or something. And it was just everyone turned and looked at Woodsy, but no one really got that mad about it at the same time. So I don't know. It was just perfect. And I was just like, oh my gosh. I remember that so many other times he would just tweet like a random punctuation or just a letter or just little things like that, as a lot of people of his age did from time to time.
Right.
But I always gave Woodsy tons of credit for taking the risk he did, from going from television to radio at that point in his career, and for always adopting the new technology, like being on Twitter and doing these things, and learning to use the audio recording technology, and of course the newsroom software to read the news and to get clips and play clips and do that all sort of thing. So the fact that he was always willing to be able to do that was really cool as well. So
he wasn't and you and I discussed this a lot.
Yeah.
He wasn't your grumpy old school media guy, because there's a lot of those in Canada.
And he's of a generation that is overwhelmingly kind of like that, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. you're right. A generation that is overwhelmingly a bit insufferable when you get to know them. Again, I think we're blessed in Saskatchewan that we largely avoid that. I mean, like the Murrays and the Van Stones of the world, like those guys aren't like that. But we've met some, especially from Alberta, that are very much like that. But like, yeah, Woodsy was just like that old media guy that all the new media guys loved. And that to me is a huge sign of respect and love in this business, that like, if all the new guys that embrace analytics and think that wearing a suit to games is dumb, if you can be embraced by all that next generation of guys, it's like the ultimate proof that, in this business you have no ego. And that's the number one thing with Woodsy. You'd see him crushing bows out at karaoke nights, and just a beauty. Like, I know that term's overused, but it's such a good guy. Like,
yeah, and I remember I used to always bug him that we would have to name if they ever built an overpass or some kind of system to get trains off the ring road, we'd have to name it after him. So I used to always call it the Warren Woods Memorial Overpass, even though, and I never anticipated it actually having to be a real thing, but I do hope that should something come to pass there one day, that whether it's an overpass, an underpass, or something, that his name gets put on that thing. That would just be, I think that would be the perfect sort of little note that a lot of people may or may not get, but I think it would just be great to be able to do that.
Rail at the Cooperator Center, you got to name that like the Woodsy Rail. I love the fact that New Mosaic now has a proper rail while you can just sit there. Like, you got to put his name on both those. Like, I knew New Mosaic is new, obviously, and he didn't hold court the way he did at Pats games, but you got to toss his name on that. Like, the Pats, like, that was his thing, right? Like, you got to toss his name on that, and I hope they do, and I hope that gains some traction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're going to get into, of course, Charleston Hughes and free agency and all that. But before we get into all that, in honor of Warren Woods, what's in the glass this week?
Well, if had I known we were honoring Woodsy, I would have grabbed some Bohemian. But I couldn't quite bring myself to do that. But what I could bring myself to do was go out and buy, over the weekend, the Pile of Bones 8-pack mix pack. And as a guy that is pretty staunchly against stouts, minus the cold brew Americano, because I like coffee and I like beer, and I very much feel like I'm on the Drew Carey show when I have those. To get a local mixer pack that doesn't mess around by throwing a stout or a dark ale in there is fantastic. So I've been thoroughly enjoying that. So for tonight, of course, the white IPAs and the Space Cadets were gone basically that same night. And this is not me saying that these beers are bad. They're just not the ones that I was all over quite as quickly. But we're starting tonight with a Scarth Street Blonde from Pile of Bones. A nice one if your friends are just getting into craft beer, support local, a nice blonde ale, and taking your advice. Normally, at some point in the episode, I have to awkwardly walk across my basement with my laptop and microphone in tow to grab my second beer from the beer fridge. Instead, taking your advice, I have taken the Pile of Bones Red Ale, which, as you mentioned, I think last time we recorded, it's really good right now. I can tell you it continues to be good, but I have taken it out of my fridge. It is sitting here warming up just a tad.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not to warm, like not to like room temperature or anything, but from cold, warming it up a bit. So double love for the sponsors. I would have had more, but actually it's funny. I can see the last can of white IPA from last night sitting in front of me when I was playing Cyberpunk 2077 down here in my basement.
Yeah, for me, I picked up a mixer pack of Nokomis the other day from a local store. And so, yeah, I am drinking the Nokomis Brown Ale, which is a nice, darker, sort of roasty, toasty kind of beer. Tastes a little... honestly, it drinks more like a porter or a stout than a traditional brown ale. So you will get some real beer nerds will kind of come after you a little bit for that one for being a quote-unquote brown ale. There are some people who think that Jeff and Nokomis has kind of ruined brown ales for most people because he was kind of the first to the market with it in Saskatchewan, but It's not really a brown ale. We'll just put that out there. But it's damn delicious, whatever you really want to call it, Jeff. So really not mad at you for it.
See, that's fair. I think actually you and I had this discussion. As you know, I'm kind of stout adverse.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the fact that, well, first I gave the wrong name. First I said Mark selling a mixer pack without stout in there. And you're like, wait, Mark's doing what? And of course, Mark being from Rebellion. I'm like, no. Glenn, our sponsor. And I got that all screwed up. So I'm glad you set me straight there. So me not being a stout guy, though, probably not my kind of beer. So I do like the suggestion, though, that you gave me for next time, Gas.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go buy the Nokomis mixer pack, and I will just ship you the brown ales.
I wouldn't say no, because it still comes with delicious golden ale, pale ale, and IPA. So
that's fair. And once we can stop doing this COVID thing, we can actually hang out in Nokomis and try them all ourselves.
Absolutely. I'm really interested in Nokomis right now. I saw that they're this won't interest you at all, but their yearly barrel aged imperial stout is out for their yearly batches out for that. And so they put next year's batch into the barrel at the same time. There was some left over, and they actually canned it. So I'm interested to see what it tastes like before it sits in a barrel for a year. So
right, because that's just the that's the one you always see in the big giant bottles at the liquor stores, right?
Yeah. So they got 4-pack cans of that out right now. That is the pre-aged. So that's
right.
Kind of cool. Speaking of aging, the Saskatchewan Roughriders made a decision today, as we were recording this on Wednesday, February 3rd. By the time this comes out, because it is that time of year, just about anything under the sun could happen. So that's why I felt compelled to mention the day it was.
Some veteran maneuver.
Yeah. So just in case, because by tomorrow, by the time you listen to this, it's entirely possible that everything could have changed. And sorry, but that's just the way podcasting works. So there's not much I can do about that. Regardless, they made the decision that Charleston Hughes will not be with the club during this 2021 season, whenever it begins, as they release the veteran defensive end after it seems like negotiations basically hit a wall between the two sides, and they have decided to part ways. Now, of course, both sides are kind of going to spin their way a little bit. The true story may never fully be known. It's kind of seems like it came down to a mix of money / sort of just general tone, respect sort of thing you hear from players as well. No one, just want to off the top, nobody is wrong in these sorts of decisions. These are just things that happen over the course of time with football and in sports, where you know what, for the team it's a business, and for the player it's their livelihood. So both of them have to do right by themselves first and foremost. And I think ultimately that's what happened here. Charleston Hughes is going to go where he thinks he has the best opportunity to maximize the time he has left in the CFL in terms of, sort of financial interests and that sort of thing. And the Riders are going to do what they believe is best for their team for this year and probably for the next few years after that as well. So the interesting thing that's kind of come out of all this, and we'll get into sort of the big picture of sort of what the moves have all meant since, but because I think there's a clear trend of what Jeremy O'Day's kind of been doing, especially on defense a little bit, is this talk that it seems like it came down to, at least at the start of negotiations, a roughly $15,000 difference between the two. And while a lot of people are talking about how that doesn't seem like a very significant amount of money, and on some $4-point-something million, whatever the floor is on the salary cap that they're probably going to spend to this year, it's not. But when you consider other decisions that this team still has to make and other players that they have to fit into their system, $15,000 isn't an insignificant amount of money when you still want to work with other guys to get on your roster. Especially, $15,000 could be a pretty significant difference when it comes down to whether you can keep, say, Cameron Judge or not.
Well, and that's exactly it. Every single dollar helps, as you have to look at. We have to assume that the gentleman's agreement has gone through, as collusion laden as it is and as flawed as it may be, that teams are basically looking at the floor as the cap this year rather than looking at the cap as the cap. So
floor-ish, maybe not quite as hard as the top end of the cap, but floor-ish.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have to assume that with all the rumors and reporting coming out, that nobody's going to be spending to the cap this year. So 15G could be make or break for a lot of people, and you have to look at, the position and the Canadian, non-Canadian status of these guys and make, a big picture decision, right? So Charleston Hughes, I hate to say it, I love him on social media, although I did find his little stink of desperation a little off-putting the past week or so. It seemed a little weird, like asking fans to start a GoFundMe and going out and, basically going on tour and saying, sign me, sign me, sign me. I don't know. It just, I know he's going to land. I know he's going to land someplace. It just, it had a bit of weirdness to it, right? But yeah. Charleston Hughes plays a position that I don't want to say is easy to replace, but it's easier to replace than others. The defensive line, unless you're a Willie Jefferson, unless you're an absolute freak, if you've just basically decided that we're going to go young here, we might take some lumps, we believe we can get pressure with some new guys, it's a position that, in terms of American players, is easier to fill than, say, looking for a Canadian D lineman or a Canadian linebacker or something like that. So it is, to me, it's a calculated risk by Jeremy O'Day, one that I absolutely agree with. They've already got young players on this roster, and if you were to make me pick between getting a defensive lineman and, say, a ratio-breaking Canadian linebacker, there's one of those two positions I'm giving all the money to. And unfortunately, as well liked and as big of a name that Charleston Hughes is, it is not to Charleston Hughes. So I think he's making a great decision here.
Yeah, and I think really when you look at it, these are the types of decisions that historically this franchise hasn't made a whole lot of. Yes, Chris Jones released, Weston Dressler and John Chick, and Darian Durant, he was traded. So that kind of started the way for it. But before that, there was a lot of times where they would just hang on to guys for maybe a year too long, a little bit too longer, and it would eventually catch up to them. And right now what we're seeing is Jeremy O'Day has picked up on that, has learned from that, and has decided, okay, no, I'm not going to make that mistake. Now, that's not to say, and I know he's talking like everything's going to be he's going to be great this year because every player should think that way. And that's not to say that Charleston Hughes isn't going to have a great 2021 season. He very well may lead the league in sacks again, and that doesn't necessarily make this a wrong move. Like the two don't necessarily correlate together, where if Hughes has another, say, 15 sack season, that doesn't mean the Riders made a mistake. Because like you said, there is a replaceable position now. Also, historically, this team has struggled at times at filling that spot, and another spot we'll talk about in a little bit in the linebacker position. Because when John Chick left to the NFL, they spent a few years trying to find their next pass rusher until John Chick returned from the NFL. So it's not unheard of to not find the guys. It can be difficult to find the guys, but we do know that A.C. Leonard had 11 sacks last year, so he's been pretty good. We do know that they have pretty high expectations, and they think pretty highly of Chad Jeter. He's a young guy who seems to be up and coming, and Freddie Bishop III's on the roster as well, who's not a bad, he's a pretty good pass rusher as well. And then realistically, you can get pretty good pass rush if you get that push up the middle, which we do expect to see from McKenna Henry this year in replacing Zach Evans, as after a bit of a dubious start last year with some shenanigans that weren't warranted on the football field, he kind of got his act together and started to play really well. So big picture, this is a decision that has kind of been lacking in Saskatchewan at times, and it's good to see Jeremy O'Day be that guy who is willing to make that tough decision, because yes, this was still ultimately a very tough decision. I'm sure Jeremy O'Day hasn't thought about it and hasn't been like, I really wish, it's been like, nope, bye Charleston, I don't care about you. Like it's still very much, I'm sure, a difficult decision, but one that had to be made and hasn't always been made for this franchise.
Right.
And it's an interesting, if you look at the bigger picture of the defensive line now for this team, where you look back at the last time they played football in that season in 2019, their starters included Mika Johnson, Zach Evans, and Charleston Hughes, and A.C. Leonard. Only A.C. Leonard is back. And so when you look at that group, what you see is a group that in 2019 was maybe a little bit on the old side. Now in 2021, you could definitely say would have been on the old side if they're all together. Mika Johnson was already gone last season had they played. So I think had they played in the 2020 season, you would have seen a more gradual shift along this defensive line. Because I think that's sort of, you saw Mika Johnson as, I'm not going to say underrated as he was in Saskatchewan. I think he got a bit of a unfair look in Saskatchewan from a lot of people just because he didn't quite meet his sack numbers that he got in Calgary. But which is not really a defensive tackle stat that matters, quite frankly.
No.
It's bonus. So I think he played better than people give him credit for, but he wasn't worth the money he was going to get, so bye-bye. And then in 2019 as well, Zach Evans wasn't looking great. Retrospect now, when they cut him, it looks like he may have been one of those guys that may have been on the bubble at the start of camp last year in 2020 had they played. So you might have slowly seen a shift there, and then it would have culminated with Charleston Hughes would have played for sure with the Riders last season, and that in 2020, and that would have been the end of it. Instead, we're just going to this big sharp change all of a sudden because they hadn't played in the game in over a year.
And you know, Joel, you make a good point here, talking about sacks being a sexy number, and that's the number that the fans look at, and that's the thing that drove me a little bit nuts here with Micah Johnson. To me, he was great. He created a ton of pressure from his spot and was almost always getting double-teamed. Now, so was AC Leonard. Now, so were other members of that Riders defensive line. If you go back and look at the film, now I'm not saying that Charleston Hughes is over the hill. I'm not saying he doesn't have another year or two left in him. What I am saying is if you watch games and you pay attention, Charleston Hughes, most of his sacks were generated from playing one-on-one. Now, again, it still takes a phenomenal amount of talent and athleticism to beat an offensive lineman one-on-one like he was, but he wasn't drawing the double teams like the rest of that line. You know, it was almost like for every Rider fan that was looking and be like, well, why doesn't Micah Johnson have 10 sacks? Why doesn't he? Well, those sacks were getting transferred to Charleston Hughes because teams were so concerned about Micah Johnson in the middle that they were double-teaming him, right? So I'm not saying he's over the hill, but I do think that if he played with a lesser quality D-line, I do think almost 2 years ago now, his sack totals wouldn't have been as high as they were.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Yeah.
It reminds me of the Doug Brown years in Winnipeg. Look back at Doug Brown's sack totals. They were almost always minuscule. But look at the sack totals of the two guys coming off the edge. You could have had me and you off the edge with the amount of attention that some teams gave Doug Brown. I'm not saying we'd sack anybody.
No, definitely not.
They'd still put 3 guys on Doug Brown, even with you and me at defensive end.
I think if you and I were at defensive end, they'd put all 5 guys on Doug Brown.
That's you're not wrong there. In his prime, that's exactly what they would have done.
Maybe 4. There'd be some other. There'd be the other DT they'd have to worry about. So maybe 4 on Doug Brown.
4 on Doug Brown, 1 on the other DT. You and me maybe get the running back. No, they'd run empty set because they knew that we wouldn't be able to get there.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to visualize in my head 5 guys on Doug Brown right now. Well, I desperately out of wind, maybe with puke on my jersey from running too hard, try to get after a CFL quarterback one-on-one and see how badly I could fail.
Yeah, even if it was like Ricky Ray or Anthony Calvillo, who were like statues, I still don't think we'd get there.
I absolutely would. I'd find a way to concuss myself and be out of the game in the first quarter. But again, like that's the effect that the rest of the line has, and I am full support of Jeremy O'Day on this move. Mm-hmm. I know there's a lot of Rider fans on Twitter that aren't.
A surprising number that do get it too now, though. I think there's a lot more fans that have come around to the idea of this is how it's supposed to be since the whole Dressler Chick thing. Because I think when Weston Dressler especially and John Chick were let go and Darian Durant, the 3 of them, Dressler was kind of quasi the one that had the best run after that. I think John Chick was good for a year at Hamilton and then fell off the cliff hard. We all know kind of how Durant lasted in Montreal for about a game before falling off the cliff. Dressler was kind of off and on, but was never really himself since then either. So, and again, that's not to say that Charleston Hughes can't have a big year or two, but just in terms of the composition of the roster and where this team is going, unless he was going to come really cheap, or the other scenario where I would have considered re-signing Charleston Hughes for the season was if I knew for sure at this point there was guaranteed, you told me the Riders that there was only going to be a 9-game regular season or something, then I'm thinking, okay, maybe. Because as much as we talk about the sack totals Hughes has had the last number of years, a lot of them have generally come in the first half of the season. So if you're telling me I can get sort of that production before he slows down a little bit, okay, now you have my attention.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, too, the talk of the money on the table of $150,000 a year for Charleston Hughes and only being, $15,000 apart. If I'm Jeremy O'Day, and I might be jumping ahead of you here, Gas, but if I'm Jeremy O'Day, releasing Charleston Hughes is a relief, I guess, because now, to me, you literally put that 150G into a dump truck, you back up to Cam Judge's house on top of whatever you had just offered him, you put that on top, and you hit the dump button. And you put it in his front yard with a contract and say, pitter patter, let's get at her.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of the natural transition was, as much as Charleston Hughes is kind of an interesting talking point in terms of, because he's a fan favorite and the personality and everything about him, the piece I wrote for 3 Down Nation. Yeah, the piece I wrote for 3 Down Nation, though, for the sort of the Rider free agency preview, as we're getting into that sort of time of year, basically comes down to whatever happens with Cam Judge, I believe, is going to determine the course of where this team goes in the next few weeks, kind of the decisions they make between now and the draft, basically, and the decisions even they make at the draft, where if they're able to re-sign Cameron Judge, which right now, Jeremy O'Day said the other day that he is still exploring NFL opportunities, fine. Personally, I don't see that working out for him, just because he didn't get a contract during the season at some point, even to be on a PR spot. They're looking at futures contracts right now for guys in the NFL, but it's been over a year since he's got any new game film. So if he didn't get a job last year in the NFL or this year up at this point, I mean, stranger things have happened, but I would be surprised if Cameron Judge signed in the NFL at this point. Is basically what I'm saying.
I agree with you.
Doesn't mean it won't happen. Doesn't mean it can't happen. I just would be surprised if it happened. So now that he's probably going to want to test the open market a little bit, which is, of course, his prerogative as a free agent, and maybe he gets priced out of Saskatchewan, maybe he doesn't. If he doesn't, and he's back, I think you're going to see Jeremy O'Day and the team kind of focus in, and they will pretty much have everything that they want in a box based on free agency at that point. You might see them go out and try it and maybe snag a Canadian offensive line or two, as it seems there's some names that may be going on the market there. In the name of not sounding out of date, I'm not really going to mention any of them in case something changes by the time you listen to this podcast, but there's some guys that could be out there. So that might kind of be the focus. You maybe see him go down that route again, maybe get a guy that way via free agency. That's kind of about it. If they manage to not sign Cameron Judge, it changes a lot about the makeup of this team in a lot of different ways, because all of a sudden now you have like no linebackers back from the last time you played a game. You have no linebackers back from last year, I believe, if you had played a game.
Right.
And you've lost one of your Canadian starters. Now, unless they think a guy like Mika Tights is ready to be an everyday starter, it's probably going to prompt a ratio change unless there's someone in the draft who comes out of nowhere and is suddenly a starting middle or will linebacker in this league, or there's another guy on the market that you think could be a starting linebacker that's a Canadian in this league. And so that changes kind of the approach of what may or may not happen over the next few weeks for this team, because all of a sudden you need to find that seventh Canadian. Yes. Plus others who you think may be able to start. So the options then become, okay, what do the Riders do as a team then if Cameron Judge isn't for the sake of this argument, the seventh starter? Obviously, in terms of the depth of their Canadian starters, he's not actually seventh, but in this situation he is right now because the other 6 spots are locked in. So where do they go from here? Well, the options could be then, do they then have to get aggressive in free agency or trades to get more Canadian offensive linemen and maybe shift right tackle to a Canadian spot? Or is there a receiver they think can fit in and then they go 3-2 instead of 4-1? Or is there another defensive tackle? Or do they think that there's someone in their secondary on top of Mike Edom that could be able to shift into, say, the outside corner spot or something like that? I don't know. These are all decisions that Jeremy O'Day is going to have to make if they're unable to sign Cameron Judge. If they're able to sign Cameron Judge, their 7 stays in place, and they still have options at receiver, offensive line, and the secondary should they want to start 8, or should something happen to an injury, there's a spot where they can plug someone in to make sure that they still have the 7 guys.
Well, and that's why the Judge signing is so important.
Yeah.
Right. You can lose Charleston Hughes because it doesn't touch your ratio. It doesn't touch the way that your roster is built. Right. Mm-hmm. If you do, say, lose out on Cameron Judge And then you, let's face it right now at this point in Saskatchewan, it's Cameron Judge or Solomon Elimimian. It's not both.
It could be neither as well. Like I think there's.
I think neither is. I think neither is a real bad situation for the team.
It's not great. Like I think losing Cameron Judge is obviously the bad thing, no matter what. I think because I think it's in all likelihood Solomon Elimimian is gone. But if they are unable to re-sign Cameron Judge, then maybe you circle back and there's maybe an opportunity there to bring him back to have some sort of presence at linebacker still, regardless. But there's other names on the markets too they'll be able to look at there as well. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I think they could overcome it more so than the loss of Cameron Judge.
Yes, absolutely. You said that best. Yeah, I think if you're able to re-sign Cameron Judge, you're going to lose Saul. Mm-hmm. Although you don't want to lose that guy, and you're probably only losing him because of the way that this year is. I don't hate it if it means, like, to me, if this is what appears as though Jeremy O'Day is aiming for, is you lose Saul, you lose Charleston, but you get Cameron Judge.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, of course, you want all three of those guys. But this is not an ideal world, and to me,
I'm not even sure with a full cap if I'm keeping all three of them. If we're being perfectly honest.
No, I think in a full cap, I keep Solomon and Cameron Judge.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I think Charleston was gone no matter what. You know, I'm glad that both sides talked and fan favorite and yada yada yada. But to me, the value of Saul and Cameron is significantly more. And again, this is not speaking him as a player. This is speaking to the depth that the Riders have acquired at the defensive line spot compared to linebacker, right? So, especially Canadian linebackers are not easy to find, especially ones that.
Well, start like high caliber starters are harder to find. You could find a million Canadian linebackers; they just all play special teams.
Well, you can find a million Sam Hurls. Yes, I got to whip on him again. Yes! It's years later and I'm still dunking on Sam Earl. I'll never forget watching him try to tackle somebody and just getting dragged. Anyways, I'm sure he's a nice guy. But you're right. You don't find a lot of Cam Judges, and I agree with you. If you haven't signed in the NFL by this point, I don't know if you necessarily are. So and you said it. You wrote it in your piece on 3 Down. Mm-hmm. And you and I were talking about before the podcast that this is what Jeremy O'Day does. Jeremy O'Day singles out his own guys that are high-value guys and makes a priority on re-signing them and then placing value bets. And that, to me, makes him a great general manager. Yes, there is a small portion of Rider Nation that's bitching all over social media today, talking about the fact that, we didn't get a big name. We're not out spending money. We're not. Basically, Jeremy O'Day, despite working with John Murphy, is like
the opposite.
John Murphy. John Murphy's like, hey, you got a name? Yeah, you've been in the league a couple of years. Want a bunch of dollars? Well,
hey, are you an NFL flameout? Come see me. Yeah.
Come on, let's get at it. Doesn't matter. Let's go. I'm John Murphy. Well, Jeremy O'Day, despite working with and again, let's think of that old 3-headed monster of John Murphy, Chris Jones, and Jeremy O'Day. There was 2 guys there that were like, Joe Blow recognizes your name. Let's sign you. Meanwhile, Jeremy O'Day has taken the approach of John Huffnagel and gone let's sign our guys that I see value in, and then make small value bets in free agency.
Yeah, and trust my scouts to bring me younger, cheaper guys to fill out the roster.
Exactly. Yep. Which is what Calgary's been doing for years. Mm-hmm. And it's good to see in Saskatchewan that. And all this being said, though, Cam Judge is very much, though, one of those guys that re-signing Cam Judge is looking through the free agency list for guys that are still out there that haven't taken pay cuts, that haven't re-signed with their teams. There's not a lot of guys that are on other teams that you could convince me that would be a bigger splash than re-signing Cam Judge right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And because, a lot of the names out there, too, are in spots where they don't really need guys. Like, there's guys like Ricky Collins and these different receivers that have become available all of a sudden, but they're loaded to the nines a receiver. They don't need to sign a receiver. There was some rumblings about Greg Ellingson because Jason Maas liked him. He ended up re-signing in Edmonton. That's the only guy that had a receiver got to the open market I could have seen them maybe making room for. But other than that, like, you don't need to make a move there. You don't need to make a move at running back. You don't need to make a move in the secondary.
No.
The defensive line guys are mostly there for the most part. You're going to have the three that we talked. You're going to have like AC Leonard. You're going to have Chad Jeter. You're going to have McKenna Henry. And then the American spot will be filled by someone. They'll figure that out. It'll probably be some younger, cheaper guy, and it'll work. It'll be fine, probably. And so you're basically looking at linebackers and some offensive linemen, because you're always looking at offensive linemen. And
especially Canadian, especially with the sneaky devastating loss of Dakota Shepley to the NFL.
Yep. Yeah, so there's certainly things that's basically all they have to look at, and from a offensive line perspective, that can be looked at in the draft a little bit to add some depth there. And they have some other guys. They have last year's draft class to come into, which will help obviously, right. And that's where it's going. And the other spot where they can probably just look at in the draft or late in free agency, because I guess outside of all that, if you really wanted to talk about a spot, I guess the Riders maybe need to make some decisions on. Is on special teams, and that's both of their kickers, who neither of which have re-signed right now. John Ryan has basically sort of suggested he still wants to play football. It's not really about the money for him, so it sounds like if the Riders are interested and he's interested, he'll probably re-sign at some point. It's
because the Riders apparently love Rouges after leading the league in them, they'll probably bring him back.
Yeah, so I mean, reading between the lines, that sounds like something that may happen if there's mutual interest. Maybe he explores elsewhere if there isn't. I don't know. I wouldn't mind a switch at punter personally, but that's me. Brett Lowther had some interesting comments, though, where he's basically said, he would like to play for the Riders again this year, as every free agent always ever says. But he's not entirely convinced about signing a CFL contract anywhere. Now, this isn't even about the Riders as far as we know. He had a great story with Murray McCormick talking about Murray McCormick, leader of the Post, of course, talking about how he's unsure about signing a CFL contract right now until he's fairly certain that there's going to be games played, because he would not want to sign a contract and then not be able to play. Now, his method of trying to get on with an NFL team hasn't really worked. I'm just tweeting them, but regardless,
or having everybody in friggin' Saskatchewan tweet them every time a kicker mixes a kick, like, guys.
But regardless, I understand where he's coming from, where at least you have the opportunity to potentially play there or somewhere else should something happen in the CFL not play games. Now, at this point, I'd be fairly confident there's going to be some sort of a CFL season this year, but I understand what he's saying in terms of, I want to see this play out a little bit on the COVID side a little bit more before signing on the line.
Right, and you can. If I was in his situation, I would think the same way. Yeah. Right. Like,
you're such a specialized guy that you may be replaced. Like, they could draft a guy, or they could find some guys in free agent. But if all of a sudden, a week before camp, Brett Lowther shows up and says, "Hey, I want to sign a contract," you'll be like, "Okay," because he's a proven commodity that's going to kick at least 85%.
Exactly. He's going to kick 85%, and he has the correct passport as well, right?
Yeah.
So both big factors with it. I can see Brett Lowther's point, because let's face it, the CFL strategy for next season is basically, oh shit, let's hope the vaccine gets out there to the point we can have some to all fans in the stands next year. They haven't really had, their plans as much put together with duct tape and hope as the NLL's was, and the National Lacrosse League just canceled their spring season, quote unquote. But I agree with his point. You're right. You're a weird opportunity away, or a hamstring tear away from playing in the NFL, so why lock yourself up? But that being said, this is like, with the expanded practice rosters, with everything that's going on in the NFL, with how just flagrantly shitty kickers were down south this year,
I'm honestly surprised he didn't get a look from someone.
I agree with you. I am surprised he didn't get a look. But the fact that he didn't get a look is maybe a sign that, Brett, you're going to need a little bit more on film.
Maybe, yeah.
So I don't fault him for waiting until we know there's actually going to be a season to sign, but to me, you should make sure you sign somewhere, because, you have the ability, you have the skills, you have the obnoxiously annoying Twitter following, to the point the word Lowther is actually muted on my Twitter because it just got insufferable. But you have all that going for you, so
But
obviously
he does
something else.
Yeah, he does have the capability to wait this out a little bit, though. Like, he doesn't need to sign in the first week of free agency.
No, absolutely. And I imagine he's probably had an open dialogue with Jeremy O'Day, basically saying as much.
Yeah.
But I am all for free agent kickers.
Well, yes, because there is one specific kicker that, as far as we know, despite kicking in the NFL a little bit this year and remaining on a practice roster spot afterward, has not signed on with said NFL team, has not signed a futures contract anywhere in the NFL, and therefore, I think NFL practice rosters are like CFL ones where when the season ends, unless you are signed to a futures contract, you are instantly a free agent, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one that is currently already on the market and could be signed today if a CFL team was interested.
Sergio.
So is this now the start of the Sergio to Saskatchewan campaign? Until they sign John Ryan and Brett Lowther, probably eventually. But regardless, we can get our hopes up that our boy, your son, my adopted son, will end up in our home of Saskatchewan, so we will be able to do an incredibly dumb podcast episode with him.
Oh, that would be just like...
That's really all this is about. It could just be for training camp, and then we'd just be happy because we did the episode, and then... obviously we want Sergio to have a job in the CFL or somewhere in football, so we can talk about him all season, but at the very least, we would like him to be in camp in Saskatchewan in order to do an episode with him.
Well, and that would be it. Totally selfishly... Like, okay, there's one place I'd rather Sergio go, being a Bombers fan, and that's to Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
If Justin Medlock leaves, retires, goes to the NFL, and they sign Sergio, I'm getting a Castillo jersey. Done deal. We'll do a 7th Bombers jersey. I don't even care. But if he, like, the thought of being able to drive down to Regina, talk to our old colleague Ariel Zur, and get a 2-on-1 with Sergio Castillo, and have him sign something of it. I will find on eBay an 8x10 of Sergio from his time with the Jets, get it signed. It shall hang in any man cave I've ever had.
Get him to sign a picture of him chugging the seltzers in the XFL locker room.
That's even better. I will get that. I will get it blown up in Don's photo, and I will have him sign that. Because anybody that openly crushes a couple of drinks after a win, and is by all accounts a pretty decent human, and has a fun name to say, that's my boy Sergio. So yes, let's begin the Sergio to Saskatchewan campaign. Let's go, Sergio, my boy. Come home. Come to the prairies. We're waiting for you.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Oh,